3, 2, 1.
Hey y'all! Welcome back to Bible Fun with the Duns. Today, we jumped ahead and we read Ezra chapter 1. For you, this is our reading for today.
That's right. So Ezra chapter 1, number 1 is the story of Israel coming back after the captivity. Now, you got to remember, for about 70 years, Israel had been carried away. They had lived under the Babylonians. That's where we get stories like Daniel and the lion's den and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then, once the Babylonians kind of crumble, the Medes and the Persians come about. This is the same time Ezra is going to tell us in chapters 1 through 6 about the years right before Queen Esther. And so chapters 1 through 6, Ezra is going to tell the story of the first group that got to come home. Ezra himself doesn't show up till about chapter number 7. I like that because it reminds me that even when your name is on the book, it's not necessarily about you, it's what God does. And so that's what's happening in this story. Now here's what I think you ought to pick up on. Whenever you read this book, it helps me to remember this, that God is kind of repeating a cycle here. All right, so think about this. If you remember back to the days of the Old Testament, the older Old Testament, when Israel lived as slaves in Egypt, when God brought them out of Egypt, He was bringing them to a promised land. But before He brought them out of Egypt, what did He do? He sent all of His people to all of their Egyptian neighbors and say, hey, we're about to leave. Give us whatever you think you want to give us. And they gave them gold and silver and jewelry. They gave them the riches of Egypt just to leave. So that when they got to the promised land, their whole system was set up on the wealth God gave them coming out of slavery. When you start reading through Ezra, what you're reading about is the story again of God bringing His people out of their bondage into the promised land. But listen, the people that financed this restoration of their kingdom was the Mede and the Persian Empire itself. They went to their neighbors and the king of Persia is giving all this stuff. And so everything is financed. This is like a second Exodus. Now, what you find whenever you read through this is that whether God promises discipline or blessing, God is always going to be faithful to His word. Now, we have some takeaways from our ladies in our discipleship group. We got some takeaways. Anna Kate, what'd you get first?
I got, first is King Cyrus of Persia allowed many of the people of Israel to return to their homeland. What he didn't realize, however, was that he was the means of fulfilling God's promise to return the people to their land. As Proverbs 21:1 says, the king's heart is like a stream of water directed by the Lord. He guides it wherever He pleases. God's plans are never overthrown. Are you willing to trust that He will fulfill any promise He's made to you?
Absolutely. So what Anna Kay's talking about is back in verse 1, it says, in the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, the word of the Lord was stirred by the mouth of Jeremiah that might be fulfilled. And the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of Persia. So Cyrus lets the Israelites go home. But was it Cyrus's idea? No. As a matter of fact, if you went all the way back to the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah 16, Jeremiah 24, Jeremiah 30, Jeremiah 32, it tells that all this is going to happen, and it even calls Cyrus by name about 100 years before he's even born. God knows what He's going to do. Now, let me give you something else here. Look in verse number 7. It says, and King Cyrus brought out the articles of the house of God. So this is all of the temple, like bowls and the furniture, all that Nebuchadnezzar took and stole and took to Babylon, and people wondered where it was for years. Here's what Jeremiah said about this in Jeremiah 27. I think Bailey's got this.
Yes, this is what the Lord of armies, the God of Israel, says about the articles that remain in the temple of the Lord, in the palace of the king of Judah in Jerusalem. They will be taken to Babylon and will remain there until I attend to them again. This is the Lord's declaration. Then I will bring them up and restore them to this place.
All right. So what that's saying is, remember what a sad and terrible day it was, like when Jerusalem fell and everybody was taken into Babylonian exile. It felt like it was all over. Okay, it felt like the whole country was gone. Nebuchadnezzar came in and took everything they used for worship, and he took it back to Babylon and he put it in a room like he had conquered, and it was all his stuff now. But now we get the full picture. God was going to discipline his people, but he would not let his enemies have his stuff. So what they thought was, we're just going to put this up in our treasury, in our bank. God said, no. You're going to hold it in a safety deposit box until I'm ready for it. And whenever I'm ready, you're going to send it back. And my people are going to use it to worship me again. Jeremiah told them this was going to happen. And this is literally what unfolds in chapter number 1. This is the God who makes promises and keeps on keeping his promises. Ladies, did we have any other takeaways I'm forgetting?
Didn't.
Who had something?
Did you have scripture? No.
So I had Philippians 2.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Read that for us, Elizabeth.
For it is God who is working in you both to will and to work according to his good purpose.
For it is God who is working in you. For what?
For his will and to work according to his good purpose.
Okay, so watch this. God was working in Cyrus to send him home. God was working in Jeremiah to tell them, one day you're coming home. God is working in his people to send them home. This whole group, this ragtag group of people who are traveling all this way to go back home, by the way, they're going home to a city that's been destroyed. Their houses are gone, their gardens are gone, their temple is destroyed, their city is demolished, their walls are gone. It's like walking back into a war zone, and they're leaving. By the way, not everybody left captivity. A lot of folks went into captivity and they were so sad that we're here, and then they built lives for themselves and they go, oh, we don't need to go home. This group, though, had their hearts stirred to go home. And what happens is everybody from the Persians to the prophets to the people, God is stirring them up in order to bring back what he said he was going to do. So, even when it looks like it's the end, God may be setting things up for something new to come out of it. And so that's what we get from Ezra chapter number 1. We're going to see you tomorrow in Ezra chapter number 2. We're going to read through this book. It really is a good book about how God makes all things new.
Stick through it.
Yeah, stick through it.
Tomorrow.
Hey, chapter number 2 is a lot of words, a lot of names. Just do the best you can, and listen, let your eyes fall on every word of it.
We laugh.
All right. So we'll see you then.